I absolutely adored Star Wars Battlefront 2, both the 2005 classic that I grew up with, as well as the 2017 game. Now, admittedly, I didn't play the 2017 one much, considering the terrible state that it launched in, but by the late 2019 renaissance the game experienced, it was probably one of the last online shooters that I really actively played consistently. So I was justifiably excited to try out Jedi Fallen Order for the first time on my Series S. Honestly, besides Halo Infinite, I haven't owned my Series S long enough to play any games that are really optimized for the console, so Jedi Fallen Order was going to be one of the first. Now keep in mind the fact that this game is developed by Respawn, the same studio behind Titanfall, so it was no surprise to me that there was a heavy emphasis on parkour as I navigated the tutorial level in the scrapyard. Combat in this first level is essentially non-existent, which kept me from seeing just how animation-based it would turn out to be. But this isn't Mirror's Edge, so I was anxious for that real action to get underway. The cutscenes, though, didn't disappoint, and this really felt like it was going to be a great, epic Star Wars game. But once that came to pass, and I landed on the first planet outside of the tutorial, I quickly realized this wasn't the game that I thought it was. You know in Pokemon where you have certain routes that branch off into different options, and you go down one route, fight maybe a few trainers, find maybe one path that's blocked by an HM that you don't have yet, another that maybe a Snorlax is sleeping on, and then maybe there's one other path that actually progresses you forward? Well, that's basically the level navigation in this game. It's repetitive combat in linear pathways, repetitive combat that I will say is like a Madden sports game, very much animation based. You press a button, it does an animation, and it really follows that animation through and doesn't break it, and it just doesn't feel very smooth to me. And sure, occasionally you can find some different routes that, are creative in one way or another and lead to some sort of little unlock, but usually something cosmetic, though it occasionally can be something that is like, say, a stim increase, where it's a more permanent increase to how many healing items you're holding. Now, this type of traversal was fun for me at first, but it really overstayed its welcome when I realized that these corridors were going to make up the majority of the game. It's like the developers took a look at Final Fantasy XIII and said, you know what? I like those corridors. You could just use some more platforming. By the time I was half an hour into navigating my way to the objective on this first world, I was starting to wonder when it would ever open up. And this is a game that's very reminiscent of something that was made in the early to mid 2000s because of some of its design choices. And maybe even an older if you dare look off into the foggy abyss that looks like it belongs to the Nintendo 64. This really just broke my overall experience, because to me, I'm playing on a new console. I know it's not a Series X, Series S, but a new console, and I have to see these gaping holes in the levels that aren't really a stylistic choice that in any way fit the Star Wars theme. After all, I don't recall so many environments in the films having ledges that dropped off into a foggy and barren depth a mile below the planet's surface. But it's just there for the sake of you dying? I don't really know. It's not a stylistic choice at all. All of this aside, the XP I was earning to unlock branches of the skill tree was rewarding of enough a trickle of improvements to keep me invested. I'm not very familiar with Dark Souls as a franchise, but Jedi Fallen Order seems to use a similar progression system as the saving is tied to meditating, and this can only be done at certain spots in the game, similar probably to the fire that you have in Dark Souls. And doing so also allows you to purchase skills and restore your life at these locations. But then I found my breaking point with the game, and I don't think I'm alone on this. And I say that because I looked at the achievement unlock percentages. I know this can be a bit deceiving, especially for a game that's on Game Pass, because after all, there's a huge audience of people that may just download the game, boot up once, and then let it sit on their hard drive from that point forward. But regardless, about 85% of Xbox people beat the original tutorial, that first, scrapyard. They beat that tutorial. A few hours after that, when you're essentially put into a tomb, similar to what you'd find in a Tomb Raider game, and you're doing all these ridiculous puzzles that feel totally out of place in a Star Wars game, there's a huge drop-off in the number of players that actually make it out of that first tomb, if you're looking at the achievements. And I don't mind light puzzle elements, but it got to the point where I'd tried unsuccessfully for 20 minutes on the same sort of instance of this puzzle, and I had to resort to using a guide. The funny thing is, the guide video I watched was a big reason why I wanted to share my opinions on this game in the first place. You look at the game, you see a Metacritic score 81, and you're led to believe that, yeah, most people like this game, and I suppose that's probably true. But you look at the comments on this specific guide, and I started to realize that other people shared my frustration. This felt more like a Tomb Raider game at times than a Star Wars game. More like an introduction to a Souls-like than a Star Wars game. More like an early 2000s platformer than a Star Wars game. Now remember how I said 85% Xbox players completed the tutorial? Only 50% of them completed the tomb, which was just a few hours later. So 35% of them got into that tomb and they said, this ain't a Star Wars game, and they turned it off. So after unlocking that achievement, so I'm one of the 50% of people that actually unlocked the achievement. I completed that, but then I decided to shelve the game immediately after. And the vast majority will say this is a great game. But it's okay for me to look at a popular game and just say, this isn't for me. And after all, the Tomb Raider and Dark Souls games are popular. But I know very little about those franchises because I know it's something that I'm not personally interested in. And the difference here is that this is a Star Wars game. I like Star Wars, so I thought that it'd be more like The Force Unleashed. In reality, Star Wars games come from a load of different genres. Let me take the Starfighter game, for example, which I'm not interested in any games that have aerial combat. It was my least favorite part of Far Cry 5, where there's one boss battle where you have to do aerial combat. I absolutely hate how things can be moving in literally any direction. The point of all this isn't to say Jedi Fallen Order is a bad game, because obviously critics think differently, but it's to say half the players didn't even make it past the first tomb. And I can't be alone in feeling that this game was just simply not what I expected it to be. And the truth is that's okay. It's a video game, it isn't a job, and it's too easy to get sucked into feeling like you have to finish these single-player games. But the reality is that there are a lot of other games out there to try instead. Abandon one if you don't like it and move on. That's what I did here, and ultimately, your time is worth it. And what games have you dropped recently without finishing? Let me know down in the comments section. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.